Having understood the Environment Protection Act and the Air Act, let us now look at the third environmental law which is applicable in the country. This is related to wildlife and it is Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So, wildlife, when we say, it refers to undomesticated animal species. Okay, that is those which cannot be domesticated and those grow or live in the wild without being introduced by humans. It also includes plant species. So, Wildlife Protection Act is a legislation to protect and manage wildlife, that is plants and animals. Why was this enacted? It was enacted due to the gaps in previous Wild Birds and Animal Protection Act 1912. So previously Wild Birds and Animal Protection Act was carrying out the function of protecting the wild animals. But then there were various drawbacks or gaps in this act, and therefore to fulfill those gaps, Wildlife Protection Act 1972 was enacted. Its jurisdiction covers entire India. That means it is applicable to all all over the country. Originally, there were 6 schedules in this act with varying degrees of protection to wildlife. Now, recent amendment has reduced these schedules to 5. Okay, but remember that originally there were 6 schedules, and each schedule offered a varying degree of protection to the wildlife. Schedule 1 and 2 provide absolute protection to wildlife included in it. Okay, and the penalties for offences conducted under these schedules is higher. Okay, so, and this mostly contains the endangered plants and animals. So the example here are black buck and chameleon. That means these animals are included in schedule 1 and 2. Then schedule 3 and 4 also provides protection. Okay, but the penalties are lower when we compare this schedule to schedule 1 and 2. So the penalties here are lower. Then which animals are included in schedule 3 and 4? Cheetal and sambar. So such animals will be given protection, but for the offences conducted under schedule 3 and 4, the penalties are lower. Then schedule 5 contains vermin animals, okay, those which are responsible for causing nuisance, like fruit bats, common crow, rats, etc., and those which can be freely hunted. But now the amendment has 2022 year, now the recent amendment has done away with this schedule. Okay, so presently this schedule they have removed. Schedule 5 contains all the vermin animals. Schedule 6 contains specific endemic plants. Okay, endemic, this word we have discussed earlier, that plant or animal species that are confined to a particular region are known as endemic plants. So schedule 6 contains specific endemic plants, and these are prohibited from cultivation and planting. That means you cannot cultivate them on your farm. Okay, then the act was amended means additions and deletions were made to the act. Okay, amendment can be anything, it can be addition of provisions, it can be deletion of provisions also. So it was amended subsequently in the year 1982, 1986, 1991 and 1993, and recently also to accommodate provisions for its effective implementation. So various new provisions were added so that it is effectively implemented all over the country. Now, there is an expert committee which is constituted by the Indian Board of Wildlife. Okay, you remember this name, Indian Board of Wildlife. It constitutes an expert committee, so that considers the amendments to the act whenever necessary. Any additions, deletions, or any change to the act are considered by the Indian expert committee formed by Indian Board of Wildlife. Then there are 5 types of protected areas established under this act. Okay, which are those protected areas? Sanctuaries, then national parks, conservation reserves, community reserves, and tiger reserves. So these are some of the protected areas established under Wildlife Protection Act. So what are sanctuaries? Okay, sanctuaries, these are naturally occurring areas, okay, where endangered species are protected from poaching and also predation. Sometimes the animal, in some parts there is illegal trade of animals. Okay, they are hunted for their parts of the body, such as the tooth in some tooth in case of elephant, then skin, also, and horn in case of one-horned greater one-horned rhinoceros. So these animals are killed for getting different articles from them. Okay, the parts of their body they used to produce various articles. So this is illegal. Okay, so the protection is given to the endangered species in the sanctuary against all these practices. Now it is declared by the state government by a notification. So if a sanctuary has to be formed, it is declared by state government by giving a notification. Now boundaries of a sanctuary, they are not fixed. Okay, they can be altered by a resolution passed by state legislature. Okay, so if government thinks that the boundary should reduce or it should increase, all of that can be done in case of a wildlife sanctuary. Usually the human activities in the sanctuary are limited, and that means some activities are permitted, such as timber harvesting, collecting minor forest products, and private ownership. All of these are permitted. Okay, so limited human activities are permitted inside the sanctuary. Now, what are minor forest products? Such as collection of tendu leaves and honey. All of these is permitted in the wildlife sanctuary. Okay, then biologists and the researchers are also permitted in the sanctuary if they want to study an area in the sanctuary and its inhabitants, and um, what are the wild animals or plants which inhabit a particular sanctuary. If they want to study, then biologists and researchers are also permitted. Okay, who gives the permission for these activities? The chief wildlife warden gives the permission for various activities in the sanctuary. Okay, so if you want to conduct research in the sanctuary, or uh, collect the minor forest products, or you want to own a land in the sanctuary, all of these permissions are given by the chief wildlife warden. A sanctuary can be upgraded to national park. That means a sanctuary can subsequently become a national park. Okay, we have the Dandeli Wildlife Sanctuary in Karnataka. You might have heard of this. It's very famous sanctuary. Okay, so sanctuary is one of the protected areas established under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Okay, then we have national parks. National parks, they have more restrictions compared to wildlife sanctuary. Okay, so the rules over there are stringent. Now they are declared by the state government only. Just like wildlife sanctuary, they are declared by the state government by giving a notification. Okay. But the boundaries, okay, the boundaries of national parks cannot be altered except by a resolution passed by a state legislature. So the boundaries of a national park are often fixed. Okay, they are not allowed to change unless the state legislature passes a resolution to that effect. Also, the human activity is not allowed in sanctuary. In wildlife, in the national park, human activity is not allowed in the national park. In the wildlife sanctuary, it was allowed to a limited extent, but in national park, the human activity is not allowed. Then the flora and fauna present in the sanctuary, they are in their natural state. In the national park, are in their natural state. Okay, and a national park cannot be degraded to the level of sanctuary. So wildlife sanctuary can be upgraded or it can become a national park over the years, but a national park cannot become a wildlife sanctuary over the years. So national park cannot be degraded to a level of sanctuary. So you might have heard of Kaziranga National Park, very famous for conservation of greater one-horned rhinoceros. Okay, so these were the two protected areas that we discussed about the Wildlife Protection Act, that it establishes wildlife sanctuaries and national park. Then the third protected area under the wildlife protection established under the Wildlife Protection Act is conservation reserves. Conservation reserves are the areas which are adjacent or next to national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. They are declared by the state governments after consulting the local community. So the people over there living in these areas, they are consulted by the state government that whether we should declare it as a conservation reserve or not. And if there is a consensus between them or both of them agree, then an area is designated as a conservation reserves. And conservation reserves are usually adjacent to the national park and wildlife sanctuary. Then there are community reserves. Community reserves, again, a private or a community land is declared by state government as a community reserve after consulting the owner or the community of that land. And so the owner or the local community is consulted so that they can volunteer to conserve the wildlife in the community reserve. Okay. And then there are tiger reserves. Tiger reserves are formed for protection and conservation of tigers only. Okay, so these are actually recommended by National Tiger Conservation Authority. Okay, so these are the 5 types of protected areas established under the Wildlife Protection Act. Then the current 2022 amendment provides more power to the central government. Okay, so in this new amendment, there is more power to the central government as compared to the state government. The number of schedules is also reduced. It is reduced to 5. The earlier schedule 5 there were 6 schedules. So schedule 5 is removed and the total schedules are reduced to 5. And the penalties have also increased. It is for general violation it is 1 lakh, and for specially protected animals it is 25,000. So there is increase in the penalties also. Chief Wildlife Warden is appointed by the state to control, manage and maintain all sanctuaries in a state. Okay, so Chief Wildlife Warden, we discussed about this person when we were discussing the sanctuaries. So this is an officer which is appointed by the state government to control, manage and maintain all the sanctuaries in the state. Then, what are the objectives of the act? First is to prohibit the hunting of animals. Okay, which animals? Wild animals. So there is ban on hunting of wild animals. Second, the powers are given to the officers for punishing the offender. That means if anything wrong, a person commits anything wrong which is not acceptable under this act, then the powers to punish are given to the officers. Okay. Third, to support the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, it is known as CITES in 1976. That means the endangered species are protected from, or the trade in these species is prohibited. Okay, trade in endangered species under this convention. So then the to support the Man and Biosphere Program of 1971 and to regulate the trade in wildlife. So all of these are the objectives of the act. Okay, so now let us just look at what have we discussed in the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. That it is a legislation to protect and manage wildlife, it is plants and animals. Why it was enacted? Because there were gaps in the previous Wild Birds and Animal Protection Act 1912, and the jurisdiction of this act covers entire India. There are total 6 schedules with varying degrees of protection. Okay, so schedule 1 and 2 provide absolute protection to wildlife, that is included in it, and if any offense is conducted under these schedules, the penalties are higher or the punishment is higher. So what animals are there? Black-buck chameleon, these are included in schedule 1 and 2 respectively. Then schedule 3 and 4, okay, it also provides protection to the wild animals which are included in it, but the penalties are lower. Okay, so the example is cheetal and sambar. Schedule 5, it was previously present where it contained vermin animals such as fruit bats, common crow, rats, etc., which were allowed to be freely hunted. But now the schedule is removed. So the total schedules of the Wildlife Protection Act at present are 5. Schedule 6 contains specific endemic plants which are prohibited from cultivation and planting. Okay. Then the act was amended in 1982, 86, 91, 93 to accommodate provision for its implementation. Okay. That means the changes were made subsequently to accommodate different provisions in the act. Now, under this act, an expert committee which is constituted by Indian Board of Wildlife, if any changes have to be made under this act, then this committee, expert committee constituted by Indian Board of Wildlife, they will consider the amendments. So there were 5 types of areas established under the act: sanctuaries, national parks, conservation reserves, community reserves and tiger reserves. We have discussed what is a sanctuary, that it is a natural area and it is notified by the state government by a notification, but the activities, human activities are permitted in the sanctuary, isn't it? Such as collecting the minor forest produce, then private ownership of land. So these activities are permitted in the sanctuary. Then the boundaries of sanctuary or wildlife sanctuary are not fixed, they can be changed by if state governments want to change it. Then the permission for various activities in the sanctuary are given by the chief wildlife warden. He is appointed by the state to control, manage and maintain all the sanctuaries in the state. Sanctuaries can be upgraded to the status of national park, but a national park cannot be downgraded to the status of wildlife sanctuary. Okay. Then the next protected area that we discussed was the national parks. National parks have more restriction when compared to the sanctuary. Okay. Then we have discussed about the national park, which is another protected area, but here there are restrictions to human activities. Okay, or there are more stringent rules when compared to wildlife sanctuary. Now the boundaries of a national park cannot be altered except by a resolution passed by state legislature. Now national park cannot be downgraded to the level of the sanctuary. Okay, a sanctuary can be upgraded to the level of national park, but national park cannot be degraded to the level of sanctuary. Then we have discussed another protected area, which was community reserves. Community reserves, again, if any private or community land, state government wants to declare it as a community reserve, then it consults the local community or that individual, and then they volunteer to conserve the wildlife in the area. Conservation reserves are again adjacent to national parks, wildlife sanctuary, and these are declared by the state government after consulting the local communities. Then the tiger reserves. Tiger reserves are there for conservation of tigers, and these are declared on the recommendation of NTCA. Now, current 2022 amendment, which was passed by Rajya Sabha recently, it has given more powers to the central government. The number of schedules is reduced to 5. Penalties have increased. Okay. Then what are the basic objectives of this act? That to prohibit hunting of wild animals, to support CITES, this Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, to support Man and Biosphere program, then to regulate the trade in wildlife. Then certain powers are given to the officers for punishing the offender. Okay. Having understood the Wildlife Protection Act, let us now look at the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. Now, what is this act? That it is a legislation to regulate the agencies responsible for checking the water pollution. Okay, so basically it is for prevention and control of water pollution. So the various agencies that are responsible for keeping check on water pollution are regulated under this act. And the ambit of pollution control boards, both at center and state. See, there are two pollution control boards. One is the Central Pollution Control Board and the other is the State Pollution Control Board. So the ambit means the extent of power of these boards. Okay. Now, the Water Act 1974 was adopted by the Indian Parliament with the aim of prevention and control of water pollution in India. So it was enacted after the Wildlife Protection Act, that is in 1974. You know, water is utmost important for living organisms. We need water for drinking, but also for other purposes. Life without water is, no one can imagine. Okay, it is difficult. If water is polluted, you know that the health of the animals and humans is, or plants, or health of the planet itself is compromised. Okay, so water is utmost important. Therefore, in order to prevent and control water pollution, the Indian Parliament it enacted the Water Act in the year 1974. Now let us look at the salient features of this act. First is that to prevent and control water pollution. Okay, you might have discussed about water pollution in the first unit. Okay, so to prevent and control water pollution, then to maintain and restore the quality of all types of surface and groundwater. Surface water means the water which is present in the rivers, lakes, ponds. This constitutes the surface water, and groundwater. Okay, so maintenance and restoration of quality of all types of surface and groundwater. Then establishment of central and state boards for pollution control. That means there is a central board, okay, and a state board for each of the state which is established. The central and state pollution control boards, they are given some powers. Powers to what? To advise, coordinate, and also to provide technical assistance. Okay, advice means what? They will advise the respective governments. That is, Central Pollution Control Board will advise the central government. State Pollution Control Board of a particular state will advise the state government of that state. Then they will also coordinate various activities under for prevention of water pollution. Also, they will provide technical assistance if needed for prevention and control of water pollution. Okay. Then under Water Act 1974, sewage or pollutants. Okay, sewage or pollutants also, they cannot be discharged into water bodies, including lakes, and therefore it is the duty of State Pollution Control Board to intervene and stop such activity. Now you might have also seen the water treatment plants that are present on the river that flows in through our city. Okay, and so the water, sewage water is first treated, and the clean water is only allowed after treatment. On treated water is only allowed to enter the river. So the sewage or pollutants, they cannot be discharged into the water bodies, including lakes. Okay. It also prohibits disposal of any poisonous, noxious, or polluting matter to the flow of water or in a stream. So disposing or throwing any poisonous substance, okay, polluting substance in the flowing water is also not allowed. Okay. Then violation of the act includes fine and imprisonment. So if someone violates this act or releases the pollutants in water, then there is a fine and imprisonment under this act. Okay, anyone which is failing to abide by the laws is liable for imprisonment under section 24 and 43. What is this punishment? It is not less than 1 year and 6 months to 6 years. Okay, 1 year and 6 months to 6 years, along with monetary fines. That means also some rupees, they also have to pay some cash to the government. So this is the punishment under the Water Act 1974. The act provides for constitution of central and state pollution control boards, and also provides a joint board. Okay, there is a provision for joint board also. If a state wants a joint board, then they can establish it. What are the functions of central board? Central Pollution Control Board, it is, we already seen that it advises the central government on any matter concerning the prevention and control of pollution. So the Central Pollution Control Board will advise the central government regarding prevention and control of pollution. Then it also coordinates the activities of state boards. See, Central Pollution Control Board is one, state pollution control boards are many. Now, who will coordinate their activities? Central Pollution Control Board. It will coordinate the activities of various state boards, and it will give them technical assistance and also guidance on if they require any guidance for or information regarding the control of pollutants, water pollutants. It also establishes or recognizes laboratory or laboratories, okay, for analysis of samples of water from any stream or well or samples of any sewage or trade effluents. Now see, first to establish that there is a pollutant which is being discharged in a water body, it needs to analyze this water sample, isn't it? It just cannot go and say, yeah, something is uh, left out or something is thrown in the water. It needs to establish the fact by some research analysis. So what it will do, it will, for that purpose, in order to analyze water samples from different water bodies, it establishes or recognizes certain laboratories where all the research is carried out, okay, and the level of pollutants, level of different heavy metals is also checked, okay. Then the function of the state board, okay, state board, it will plan a comprehensive program for prevention, control or abatement of pollution of streams and wells in the state and to secure the execution. That means what are the rules under the Water Act in a particular state, that is decided by the State Pollution Control Board of a particular state, okay. Then what programs are there for prevention, control or abatement of pollution. Abatement means reduction or removal of pollution from the streams and wells which are present in that particular state, and how effectively this program is executed, okay, or implemented in a particular state. Then to advise the state government on matters of water pollution, okay. So Central Pollution Control Board was advising the central government. State Pollution Control Board will advise the state government of a particular state. Then to inspect and lay down, modify effluent standards for the sewage and trade effluents. If they have information that a particular industrial unit is discharging waste into the water body, then they have powers to, the Central Pollution Control Board, they can inspect, and also they can give different standards or modify these effluent standards for the sewage and trade effluents, okay. Then also they can evolve economical and reliable methods of treatment of sewage and trade effluents. That means they can come up with new technology to how to treat the sewage or other effluents when before discharging them into the water, okay. Then under this act, the Central Water Laboratory and the State Water Laboratory are set up. So the Central Water Laboratory is set up by the Central Pollution Control Board. State Water Laboratory will be set up by the State Pollution Control Board, okay. So civil courts, they do not have any jurisdiction to entertain any suit or proceeding in respect of any matter which an appellate authority constituted under this act. See, just like Air Act, similarly to that act, under Water Act also, the civil courts are not given any power to entertain any suit or proceeding if any appellate authority is already established for that purpose, okay. Civil courts cannot interfere. Then let us first revise this act, what we have discussed under Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. See, first of all, it regulates the agencies that are responsible for checking water pollution and the ambit or scope of the pollution control boards, both at the center and state. It was adopted with the aim of prevention and control of water pollution in India. Salient features of the act that it was enacted to prevent and control water pollution. It maintains and restores quality of all types of surface and groundwater. So groundwater also falls under or the quality of groundwater also falls under the Water Act. That means if any source or particularly the groundwater is polluted mainly by the agricultural activities, so if that is also there, then it falls under the Water Act. Also, it establishes central and state boards for pollution control. Okay, central and state boards are given some powers. Okay, what powers? To advise to whom? Central government will advise to central board will advise to central government, state board will advise to state government, then to coordinate, okay, and provide technical assistance for prevention and control of water pollution. Then under Water Act 1974, sewage or pollutants cannot be discharged into water bodies, including lakes, and it will be the duty of State Pollution Control Board to intervene and stop such activity. Okay, so if a sewage or pollutant is discharged in a water body in a particular state, then the State Pollution Control Board will intervene or interfere and stop such activity. Okay, it also prohibits the disposal of any poisonous, noxious or polluting matter in the flowing stream. Okay, also it has fine and imprisonment. What are this fine? That punishment from 1 year and 6 months to 6 years, along with some monetary fines. And it provides for constitution of a central and state pollution board. Okay, there is also a provision for joint board in this act. What are the functions of Central Pollution Control Board? Okay, that it will advise the central government on any matter concerning the prevention and control of water pollution. Second, the activities of various state boards is coordinated by the central board, and technical assistance and guidance is also provided to these boards by the Central Pollution Control Board. Then to collect, compile and publish technical and statistical data relating to water pollution. See, statistical data is very important to plan future strategies in mitigating any future problems. So for the collection, compilation and publishing the technical and statistical data relating to water pollution, this responsibility is given to the Central Pollution Control Board. Then it also establishes or recognizes laboratory or laboratories for analysis of water samples. Okay, if there are any pollutants present in the water samples or not, so all this analysis it has to do, and for that it will establish or recognize certain laboratories. Then functions of the state board. State board will prepare a comprehensive program for what? For prevention, control and abatement of pollution of streams and wells in the state, and also it will see how effectively these are implemented or executed. Then it will advise the state government on matters of water pollution. Okay, it will also inspect and lay down, modify effluent standards for sewage and trade effluents. If it finds that any industry is discharging the pollutants in the river, nearby river or any stream, then it can inspect such industry. Okay, and it will lay down the standards and modify the standards for the effluent discharge. Then evolve economical and reliable methods of treatment of sewage and trade effluents. That means if any new technology is there, then it might think of implementing or adopting that technology for treatment of sewage and trade effluents. Then it also sets up the Central Water Laboratory and the State Water Laboratory respectively. So Central Water Laboratory is set up by the central government. State Water Laboratory will be in a particular state. Okay, Again, civil courts are not given any jurisdiction to entertain any suit or proceeding. If any appellate authority is already constituted for this purpose, then the civil courts cannot interfere, or they cannot entertain any suits which or proceedings which are in respect of this matter, that is Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. Okay. Having understood the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, let us look at the Forest Conservation Act 1980. Now, the first legal draft on the forest was the Indian Forest Act 1865. Okay. Then this act was further replaced by the Indian Forest Act in 1927 during colonial period. Okay, that is during the British period. But this Indian Forest Act of 1927, it was enacted mostly to cater to the British interest, isn't it? What was the British interest? That they focused on timber management mostly. So after independence, there was a need to conserve forest, which was felt among the people, and therefore the President of India enforced the Forest Conservation Ordinance in 1980. Okay, ordinance was passed by the then President of India for forest conservation, and later on it became the Forest Conservation Act 1980. It was enacted. Now, why this act was passed? To protect the forests of the country and the matters related to it. Okay, so all the matters related to forest are dealt with the Forest Conservation Act 1980. The act was amended in 1988, so it has been amended in the year 1988. The jurisdiction of this act covers entire country. That means it is applicable to the entire country. It consists of 5 sections. Okay, there are 5 sections in the act. What are the objectives of this act? The first is to maintain the ecology and preserve the forest of our country. We know what is ecology. In the last semester we have discussed ecology, and to preserve the forest of our country. Ecology, maintaining the ecology is very, very important to make the species survive. Okay. Therefore, it is at most important to maintain ecology and preserve the forest of our country. Forests are also very important. We have discussed that some of the tropical forests like the Amazon forest, these are known as the lungs of the earth because they give a lot of pure oxygen. Okay, and they are also known as carbon sinks because they absorb carbon dioxide, isn't it? So it is important to preserve the forest of our country. Then forests are home to many animals, so therefore it becomes of utmost importance to protect these forests. To regenerate the forest by afforestation. See, during the colonial period, what was done, there was large scale deforestation mainly for extracting timber. Okay, so there was deforestation. Now the Forest Act, it aims to regenerate the forest by what means by afforestation or planting of trees in the forest. Okay, so regeneration of forest by afforestation is one of its objective. To protect the flora means plants, fauna is the animals and other ecological components of the forest, that is soil. Okay, then again the components of the soil. So water, if any river or stream is flowing through the forest, so all these components, ecological components, are also included in the Forest Act to protect the flora, fauna and other ecological components of the forest. Then to protect the integrity, territory and the individuality of the forest. Okay, then to prevent the deforestation that leads to land erosion and subsequent degradation of land. See, major drawback of deforestation is land degradation, because it leads to erosion. The topsoil is removed, and whenever the topsoil becomes loose, therefore there is degradation, because the uh, topsoil is washed away easily, or the top cover is removed easily if the forests are uh, cut down. So therefore, to prevent the degradation of land, to prevent the conversion of forest into agricultural lands or grazing lands or building of businesses or residential units, very important. This objective is very important in Indian scenario, because we are one of the highest populations in the world. So in order to feed such a huge population, the land of the forest land has to be cleared, okay, for agriculture. So this should not go unregulated. Okay, unregulated means if somebody feels that no, I want to form a field here, I want to cut this forest, nobody can do that. Okay, so this is regulated, that conversion of forest into agricultural lands, this is regulated by the Forest Act. Again, grazing lands. Okay, so no one can clear forest to form grazing lands. Again, building businesses or residential units, so that all of it is prevented by the Forest Act. Okay, now what are the features of the Forest Act? That the state governments and the other authorities are restricted to make decisions on certain matters without prior permission of the central government. See, forests are there in a particular state. If the state wants to convert it into some other land use, that if it wants to cut the forest and convert it into a residential unit, then it cannot do such, because there are restrictions on such decisions. It has to take prior permission of the central government for that matter. Okay, then the entire power vests with the central government to carry out the provisions of this act. So central government is given more powers under the Forest Act 1980. Uh, it is the most important regulator of this conversion of forest into non-forest land. Okay, so the entire power is given to the central government. Then there are penalties for infringement of the provisions of this act. Just like there were penalties for Water Act, Air Act, Wildlife Act, there are penalties for this act also. That means if someone contravenes or does not follow the rules under this act, then there are punishment for that. Then advisory committee may be formed under this act for advising the central government in matters related to forest conservation. Okay, so there is an advisory committee which will advise the central government whether this forest can be cleared for some other purpose. That if it wants to the central government wants to make any developmental project, such as building of roads passing through the forest, or clearing of forest for any industry, then the advisory committee will advise the central government whether this project can be carried out or not, what will be the environmental consequences of that. Then the penalty for this act was added in 1988 by an amendment. So whoever violates or does abets the violation of any law shall be punished with simple imprisonment of for any prescribed term, which may be increased up to 15 days. Okay, so these were the acts that we have discussed today. We have discussed in the beginning we discussed the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, then Water Act 1974, and now we have discussed the Forest Conservation Act, that it has given more powers to the central government to regulate the conversion of forest land to the non-forest use. So the conversion is prohibited. Okay, and it was felt the need for conservation of forests and its components were felt after independence. Therefore this act was enacted. Okay, so some of the objectives we have discussed is to maintain the ecology and preserve the forest of our country, regenerate the forest by afforestation, to protect the flora, fauna and other ecological components, to protect the integrity, territory and individuality of forest, to prevent deforestation, because deforestation is a major reason for land erosion and degradation of land. Then also to prevent the conversion of the forest land into agricultural lands, grazing lands, or for building businesses or residential units. Then we have seen that how the central government has more powers with respect to this act. Any decision, for any decision, the state government has to take prior permission of central government, okay, under this act. Then advisory committee is there to advise the central government in matters related to forest conservation, and penalties are also there, okay.